to the Viva Alberto's podcast. As always, I am your host, Jake Wood, and I am joined this week by writers Gabe Simons and Matt Smith. Unfortunately, the man of 1,000 podcasts, Scott Plaza, cannot be with us tonight, so we'll have to make do with the three of us, plus our special guest. Today, we are joined by... we're diving deep into the prospect sphere, right? And we're joined by one of our very favorites. His name is Brian Walton of the Cardinal Nation. You can follow him on X at @B_Walton. You can also hear him weekly on all of your favorite streaming platforms on his show, Wednesdays with Walton and Reese. Brian, welcome back. And for the first time in video form on the Viva Alberto's podcast, I see you did your hair for the occasion.
Yeah, I got my Al Roboski due here. So I'm all set, but I'm really honored that you brought me on once that people could actually see me. That's quite an honor on my part. So.
Well, it's that winning smile, Brian. And speaking of winning, I'd like to just jump right into the Cardinals system. Early on, they're doing a lot of winning. Almost every level has come out of the gates really strong. My first question for you, Brian, is which collective group has impressed you the most so far in this early season portion?
Well, I think that the start that the Memphis Redbirds had was exceptional. They're the first team across all minor league baseball to reach 10 wins. Now, AAA started a week earlier, so you'd have to say among the 30 AAA teams still, they were the first to get 10 wins. And when you think about it, it's not really all that surprising since the core of the Memphis Redbirds are either guys that stayed over from last year, a la Jimmy Crooks, or guys that came up from AA Springfield last year. And, of course, Springfield won the Texas League hands down. They won the first half standings. They won the second half standings. They won the playoffs at the end. And you could argue some of it was because maybe guys like Joshua Baez and Bryson Motts deserved to move up to AAA, and they kept them there. But the fact is there was a lot of talent there at AA ready to come to AAA. Now, probably, though, to answer your question, Jake, the most surprising start, I think, to me, is Low A Palm Beach. Palm Beach is, since the minor leagues changed and they got rid of the A advanced level and the other rookie level, they only have now this jump from rookie ball in the Florida Complex League to Class A Palm Beach. And so a lot of the international players are the guys that come to Palm Beach, as well as some of the pitchers from last year's draft that typically didn't play at all last season. And Palm Beach is off to a nice 7-2 start. They've won 6 in a row. We'll see if that holds, but it's good to see not only the top of the system where you expect it, but also the bottom of the system where there's a lot of guys who have names that, frankly, we're not all that familiar with yet starting to play well under a new manager there named Rich Benjamin, who's a very sharp young coach.
One of the key people driving the Memphis start is Blaze Jordan, and I'm curious, should we believe in his huge power surge? Is he doing something differently that he hasn't done in years past? Because his numbers are eye-popping right now.
Yeah, well, Blaze Jordan had his moments in the Red Sox system. I mean, that's why the Cardinals went after him. But when push came to shove, Blaze Jordan was available in the Rule 5 draft last December. Any one of the other 29 organizations, if they wanted to put him on their 40-man roster, they could have had Blaze Jordan for a nominal fee. And everybody passed on him because they kind of thought, hey, this is probably Luken Baker Jr., right? A guy who's maybe a quad A player, can hit the ball hard, tear it up at AAA, but maybe doesn't have the bat speed and the ability to handle the off-speed pitches the way that you need to be a major league starter. And again, I don't want to take anything away from Jordan's start. It is exceptional. It's as good as his first month with Memphis was last year, bad. And so on the average, since he's been in the Cardinals system, he's about where you'd expect him to be.
Brian, before I just drag you directly into the VEB catching wars, don't worry, we're going there for sure.
All right, good. I look forward to it.
But I was under the impression that the Springfield Cardinals just did not lose last year, right? They were just a steamroller.
Exactly. They were. And it's unprecedented, I think, for the team to not only play that way, but then have the player of the year in the Texas League and the pitcher of the year. And interestingly enough, the pitcher of the year in the Texas League wasn't Bryson Motts, who was the Cardinals organization's pitcher of the year. It was Eshawn Henderson. So for some reason, the Texas League thought Eshawn Henderson was the best pitcher. The Cardinals thought Bryson Motts was, and the two of them together, exceptional. Now, Motts has stepped into the AAA rotation. Unfortunately, Henderson's injured. and he's out, but he will be joining AAA hopefully before too many weeks.
Well, speaking of AAA, I'm just going to drag you straight into these catching wars. We've got, of course, Pages and Herrera and Bozos are out there, and Crooks and Bernal are time sharing. So, Brian, in your estimation, how much more time does Jimmy Crooks need in Memphis? Do you think he's ready to come to St. Louis? I think there are some fans who are ready to see them. There are other members of the Pages family on this podcast tonight who would like Pedro to just be inducted into the Cardinals Hall of Fame. So where's Crooks at? What's going on with him?
I think if you look at what Crooks has done, he's obviously had a very good start with the bat. Not quite the level of Jordan, but a very, very good start to the season with the bat. But his defense continues to improve. I've seen some instances where he's thrown out runners and it made it look ridiculous. And so he's really putting together all aspects of his game, Jimmy Crooks. Again, just like I said about Jordan, we're talking about, 11, 12 games. So it's not a ton. But let's look at the St. Louis Cardinals for a minute. They're a rebuilding team. They need to have guys with upside. Does Joel Pozo and Pedro Pages have any upside as major leaguers?
Come on, Brian.
They are what they are. Now, if Ivan Herrera can catch, if he can catch half the time, bring Jimmy Crooks up, have him catch the rest of the time, and cut the dead weight. They have 4 spots on their bench, and one of them is being taken with a catcher who has like 11 plate appearances so far this season. It's ridiculous. And so the other night, I think yesterday, Saturday, the game is on the line, and who do you have to come off your bench to pinch hit in a crucial situation? You have to choose from Nathan Church or Pozo. I mean, it's just maybe if the Cardinals were, competing somehow and they could get by with no offense out of the catching position, but to waste 2 roster spots on catchers who are below average, I just don't understand it. And we didn't even talk about. Well, you mentioned the fact about the job share. At AAA, Bernal is not ready for the majors yet. He needs time. But by the end of this season, Bernal's there, and Rodriguez is right behind him. And Rodriguez is a top 35 prospect in baseball, no matter who you talk to. So, the Cardinals are going to do what they do this year, no matter who's their catcher. But I don't understand why a team that's trying to invest in the future doesn't have Jimmy Crooks up in the major leagues.
Well, I have to point out that Crooks' strikeout rate right now is 36% in AAA. I have to point that out.
Okay, fair enough. 18. You're right, exactly, 36%.
And his chase rate's pretty elevated as well. Sorry, Brian.
No, and is that sustainable in the major leagues? Obviously not.
No,
obviously not.
So Jimmy does have a little bit still to work on, but the promise is obviously there.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's face it, the Cardinals aren't going to just release Pedro. And
no,
there's no trade talk now. I mean, we're 2 weeks into the season.
Sure.
So this has got to percolate over time. But I don't see any reason keeping Pozo around if Herrera can catch. Why do the St. Louis Cardinals need 3 catchers on their roster? Why?
Because, Brian, you have to have catchers at every position. We're starting to see, JJ take a little bit of a lull. I think we need to move JJ back down to AAA and put Pages at second base like we got to see last year. I think that would really fire up Cardinals fans, don't you?
Well, there's some precedent. One of the things that Yadier Molina loved to do when he was with the St. Louis Cardinals is take batting practice at shortstop. He had this dream that, he would be the svelte guy who was, making double plays and flipping the ball at shortstop. And he used to do it all the time. So, hey, I wouldn't count him out.
Jake, just go ahead and mute yourself after that, okay? We're going to how about a 5-minute timeout, all right?
No. See, you're trying to drag me down into the mud, Matt, and see what you're going to do is you're going low, so I'm going to go high, right? Going from Jimmy Crooks to one of his battery mates, let's talk about Hunter Dobbins. He's a guy the Cardinals acquired for Wilson Contreras back in December. He tore his ACL back in July, I believe it was. He's been rehabbing with Memphis, and he would seem to be on track to join the Cardinals potentially as soon as the end of April, right around then, whenever they are going to start that stretch of games without an off day. And you had the chance to watch him in spring and see his progress. What can the Cardinals reasonably expect from a young pitcher like Dobbins, and especially coming off of a major injury like a torn ACL?
Well, the good news is a torn ACL isn't his arm, it isn't his shoulder, it isn't his elbow. And I talked to Hunter the last week of spring camp. He threw a game on the backfields. Fortunately, he's one of these guys that doesn't mind talking on days that he pitches, or even actually between innings, which I thought was kind of weird. But anyway, Dobbins said, "Listen, I'm 100%," and he didn't have any restrictions on field. This was end of March. He didn't have any restrictions fielding his position. He's throwing 5 innings, 70-ish pitches. But he said their plan is to have him make like 4 starts in Memphis before he comes up. And I don't think that has anything to do with Hunter Dobbins' health and readiness. I think the reason is they don't have a rotation spot to put him yet. And they're trying to figure out, okay, is the Leahy experience going to, work out? The experiment going to work out? Is Pallante going to turn the corner? And Pallante looked, great through his first couple starts, and then, of course, today he got bombed. And now the two of them have ERAs in the 5-ish range through 3 starts each. And I think the real question is, how long do you go with those starters, especially when your bullpen is in deep yogurt? You got maybe 3 guys, you can count on, and the rest of the pen is in shambles. And if you look at what's on the shelf ready to be called up for Memphis, there's 3 relievers on the 40-man in Memphis. Roycroft, who's already bombed this year, Fernandez, who hasn't been good for a year and a half and got clobbered in spring training, and Tink Hence, who's still trying to figure it out. That's it. Those are the only relievers on the shelf in Memphis. So, will moving Kyle Leahy to the bullpen, for example, would that help the bullpen and help the rotation? Whether you bring up Dobbins or Fitz, which, by the way, Fitz has a 172 ERA through 3 starts, looked pretty good. Now, neither one of these guys are going to strike out, 9 batters per 9 innings, but you can't tell me they're not better than – and look at their history. I think between the two of them, they have like maybe 21 major league starts, something like that, at the Red Sox, about 10 or 11 each. And ERA, one of them's 370 – I think Dobbins is 372 and Fitz is in the low 4s at their time in Boston. So, again – I think that when Dobbins is ready, they're going to bring him up, hopefully, and give him a chance to start. And Fitz, I think, is ready too. And whenever they decide they're ready to move on from the guys that are there and try something else, they've got a couple guys in reserve who, should be able to step in, and it won't be their first time on a major league mound.
So, based on the years of how the Cardinals have promoted players, how long do you think it'll be till we see Tanner Franklin in Springfield? Because he struck out 57% of batters in his first 2 starts. I put that in quotes because he only threw 6 innings, but obviously he needs to build up a workload. But he kind of seems way too good for high A through 2 starts.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, Gabe. I guess the challenge is the point that you just touched on. Tanner Franklin threw 50 innings last year, give or take. So the question is, how many innings do you want Tanner Franklin to throw in 2026, and how quickly do you want him to throw them? Did they take him out after 3 innings because he was gassed or because he couldn't go further? Probably not. Probably because they're trying to conserve his bullets. But what I want to see is, I want to see what a guy does the second and third time through a lineup. And it's going to be hard this year with Tanner Franklin. But I think to answer your question, if he continues to make a mockery of his level, then they're almost going to have to move him up. But you look at Doyle, for example, and just the opposite. Now he's had, his first couple outings in Springfield and got knocked around a little bit because he's working on his pitches. And you don't want to be too aggressive with guys. You want to make sure that they're ready for the level. And early on, but to your first question, the history of the organization, what does the history of the organization say? The history of the organization you can throw out the window other than 2025 because the guys running the major league system are all gone. There's new guys. So all we can do is look at what happened last year when Rob Cerfolio and Larry Day, the farm director, and that group did. And they weren't particularly aggressive with promotions last year. Now, maybe you could argue, like I said earlier on in this podcast, I thought there were guys at Springfield that were ready for AAA before the end of the year. But I see why they kept the Springfield team together. But I didn't see excessively aggressive promotions from that new regime in 2025.
Since you brought up Doyle, Brian, could you delineate for the listeners what pitches do they want him to develop? What are they trying to work on with Doyle to maybe make him more successful as he gets to that major league level?
Well, I think we know about Doyle's fastball, right? I mean,
sure.
That gets a lot of attention. But he's got to have multiple pitches as a starter, and it's easy when you have the kind of fastball that Liam Doyle has to not really rely on your other pitches in crucial situations when you know you can blow the guys away at will. And I saw him do it in spring training. There's no reason necessarily to get as serious about his secondary pitches. He's got a splitter. He's got a sweeper or a slider or a cutter, whatever you want to call it, and he's got to continue to strengthen those offerings. Now, and it's tougher if the other guys knows it's coming. If he's not throwing a lot of fastballs, they're saying, the other team's saying, his fastball isn't working today, so let's sit on his secondaries. And if they're not his strongest offerings already. But I don't want to overreact on a very brief, very brief window for Doyle. I was asked a lot of times this year, did I think the Cardinals would promote Doyle to Springfield out of camp? And I said no for quite a while until maybe midway through March. And I could see not only how he was performing, but with what teams he was performing. And it was kind of signaling to me, okay, they're preparing him, for that fairly aggressive step.
Going from Leon Doyle to another young pitcher, I asked about, Hunter Dobbins. Another one of the Cardinals' big offseason acquisitions was Durangelo Sanger. He's gotten off to a really fast start as well with Springfield. Though he's been very selective with his usage of his left side. Do you think that by the time Sanger makes a debut with St. Louis, he will have ditched the left-handed side entirely, or do you think that he will continue to pick and choose as he ascends and perhaps keep that quote-unquote ace up his sleeve if need be?
Interestingly, what happened was before the trade was made, the Mariners decided that Sanger was going to pitch exclusively from the right side. And if you look at his numbers, his splits are certainly better from the right side. When the Cardinals brought him in, they did not make that declaration. They said, hey, we're going to give him a chance and see what happens. What happened in spring camp is when he threw bullpen sessions, he would throw the first round, the first simulated inning, left-handed, always. They switch the glove around, throw then from right the rest of the way. When spring games started, he pitched exclusively right-handed until the last week. The last week, then, a particularly tough opposing hitter, where he had a side
advantage,
benefit. Then he would switch over, and he only threw to one batter left-handed, and he didn't really have time to warm up, but yet he was throwing 95. He's throwing 95 from the left side without even having to warm up. The problem is he didn't have enough control, and he ended up walking the guy. And I think that's what happened when he did the same thing in his first game with Springfield, because he did pitch to one batter, but it's the same kind of situation. How can a guy come in, even with all that talent? I mean, think about the talent to pitch at that level from either arm. It's amazing, the athlete he must be. But I think it would be very difficult to come in and do what they're trying to do with him, which is, okay, you're in a tough situation now, switch sides and throw strikes right out of the gate.
A pitcher that I think you and Kyle are higher on, certainly than when the VB crowd voted on the prospects, is Braden Davis. I think the Cardinals are higher on him too, though, because I thought he got a fairly aggressive start at Springfield this year. He's had a very weird start to his year because he struck out 40% of the people he's faced, but he's allowed about a runner per inning to score.
Yeah.
Have you seen anything that starts to explain that weirdness?
No, I wish I could say I had the magic answer to that, but I really don't. Last year, he looked pretty good, but his strikeouts were great. I mean, like 13 strikeouts per 9. He was walking over 6 batters per 9 innings. And you think, all right, it's the first year for a guy, he's just out of college, it's first professional year. But that's something he's got to continue to work on, obviously. But Braden Davis has a lot of talent, but he's not a big guy. I mean, he's an undersized pitcher. He's under 6 feet, clearly. But yet, he still has decent velocity. He still has 3 pitches that have the potential to be good at the major league level. But I don't think Braden Davis is probably going to be in front of the rotation guy. We have him in our top 20. But, when push comes to shove, I think the chances may be that when Davis finally reaches – and he's another, one of the million left-handers that they seem to have in the system right now. I think he could end up being a reliever down the road.
Brian, if you disagree with my assumption here, then just go ahead.
I'm sorry. Before you,
go ahead, please.
I was going to say one of the reasons why is his big pitch is a changeup, and that's not bad. That's not bad. But major league starters that have a plus changeup need to have a plus fastball too, and he's not there yet. So, sorry, go ahead, Matt.
No, that's quite all right. If you disagree with this assumption, please correct the record as you look to answer here. I'm assuming Ronel Rodriguez's bat is going to be ready before the glove for the major leagues if they, promoted him. I think that stands to make sense. So
yes,
the question becomes, with the 400,000 catchers, in the system that are looking to come to St. Louis, do you think at any point, I noticed he had to start at first base, do you think at any point they're going to kind of aggressively promote the bat and maybe leave the catching behind?
I haven't seen any evidence of that yet.
Okay.
What I saw in spring camp was Bernal and Crooks, and of course Josh Cross does it anyway, but a number of the catchers play first base. And I think it's to make sure that they have another position, and in some rosters they have a little more flexibility that way. So it wasn't anything that's unique to Rodriguez.
Sure.
Having play. And frankly, he's 5'9". He's not a great target at first base, right? You want a gangly guy with long arms to catch errant throws. You got a 5'9" guy there. That's not ideal. There are people on the Cardinal Nation message board in our community who want to try him at third base, and they don't have anything to go on that other than there's this great bat and he's got to play. He's got to play somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't know. They still seem high on his catching. I saw Yachty spend a lot of time with him there.
Okay.
In spring camp, which is interesting and not surprising given the guy's a top prospect in baseball. But again, I haven't seen any indication yet. And it's still early. I mean, the guy's very early in his career at high A, so they have a couple of years before they have to really deal with that possibility.
Brian, sticking with Peoria, Ty Pete, he hit a really impressive opposite field blast in today's game. When the Cardinals acquired him, do you think that they looked at Josh Baez and what he was able to do in a similar situation with a similar skill set? And do you think, are they trying to repeat history potentially to unlock that hit tool? And Ty Pete becomes maybe a potential top 100 prospect in the game by season's end. Obviously, that's asking a lot, but do you think that's kind of the idea when they acquired him?
I don't know if they were thinking about Baez when they acquired him, but I certainly see the parallel, Jake, and I think it's very relevant. Now, I will say Pete is thinner. He's not as muscular yet as Baez is. Pete is a tremendous athlete. I mean, there's no doubt about that, but we know his challenge has been plate discipline. But, again, he's still early enough on that he can figure that out. And just like with Josh Baez, he can play center field if he has to. I'm not necessarily saying that may be his best position, but I think Pete could be a very, very good get from that trade. We're not seeing it yet, but it's still very early in his time as a Cardinal. The coaches were very, very impressed with him in camp when I asked him, hey, who are some guys to you standing out that maybe haven't hit the balls over the fence with regularity or stolen six bases or whatever it is. And Pete was a name that came up quite often.
Do you think just the pure act of the Cardinals putting Ryan Mitchell in Palm Beach is like a really good sign, even though he's off to a slow start, just because usually the high school guys, they started rookie league, right?
Again, that wasn't a surprise when I saw how he was being used late in camp. But if we would have had this conversation 3 months ago, I would have been surprised. I would have said, yeah, I'll be surprised if they push him to Palm Beach. The fact is that I saw Ryan Mitchell blister some baseballs in spring training. I mean, the guy can hit. He can hit. And he's very good physically. Very, very talented. The problem is he doesn't have a position yet. His arm is not great. And so I saw them try him at short. I saw them try him at second base. But when push comes to shove, he's in the outfield, and that may be his home. But kind of like Rodriguez, maybe, and it's still early, but it could be that Mitchell's bat will be ahead of his glove. They've got to figure out, where he's going to play defensively. And again, it's not a big hurry. It's not anything that they have to figure out right away. But it's also, you can't hide, in A ball in front of the TV cameras like you can in the Florida Complex League on the back fields at Jupiter where nobody's paying any attention. So the other thing, and I'm not saying that they'll do this with him, but another thing that the Cardinals have done in the past with guys at Palm Beach, if they struggle for a long period of time, they might, say, hey, spend a couple of weeks and get straight in the complex league.
So, Brian, the composition of the Cardinals roster is heavier on young position players. And it seems like the minor leagues, and maybe this is not a fair characterization, but it seems like the minor leagues leans towards, pitching as far as the high wattage prospects that I think they're hoping to get a lot out of. I'm wondering at all if that's going to impact the Cardinals draft. I realize they'll probably just draft the best available talent, but do you think they'll lean any towards the position player side to kind of replenish those coffers?
They never admit that they ever swing in any direction.
Okay.
I think the reason that there's an imbalance, well, there's a couple of reasons there's an imbalance, perhaps an imbalance today. Number one is that they have better young position players and better young pitchers right now. And that's nothing away, taken away from Liberatore and McGreevy. But, and couple that with the fact that both in the drafts and also especially in the trades that they've made, going back to the deadline trades in 2024, they almost exclusively went for pitching. Now, obviously Pete came in, Ledbetter came in, so they weren't all pitchers, but the guys, Clark, who we haven't talked about because he's injured, and Senja, and Joker Friardo, those guys, the guys that are top 20 type guys have been primarily pitchers, and the old adage, you can't have enough pitching. I think the Cardinals will continue to prioritize pitching. That's not to say they won't go get hitters. I mean, they drafted Mitchell early last year. Sure. But, he wasn't the proven college player either. He was he's more of a gamble as a high schooler.
Well, not only, can you never have too much pitching, but we also know that pitching is the greatest, source of currency in baseball, too. So if the Cardinals find that they're lacking something, they can always turn around and use that, excess pitching to go get whatever they might need.
Well, and the other point, Jake, is pitchers spend more time on the injured list. I mean, there's five prospect pitchers right now on the injured list between AAA and AA. Henderson, who I talked about, Roby, Pete Hansen, although Pete Hansen's pitching in rehab, Clark, Cooper Jerpy. These guys are almost all of them are on the 60-day injured list. They're out for the long haul, and the Cardinals would have tremendous pitching right now in the minor leagues if everybody was healthy. But on the pitching side, everybody's never healthy.
Brian, I wanted to ask you a question, maybe a little bit of a challenge, to be honest with you. You have the opportunity to be out on the backfields during spring training. You cover it a lot better than most publications or outlets tend to do. In your estimation, watching this spring, who stood out to you the most that maybe isn't getting the most talk or run amongst Cardinals fans or Cardinal media related types?
Well, let's talk about the third base position for a minute. Daniel Ortiz is a guy who stormed, 16th rounder out of nowhere, junior college guy, and had a great season last year. He didn't really do much in spring camp, and I was a little surprised by that. But guys who did catch my eye, Jake McGee, who can play second base, third base. They even had him catching. Now he's at Peoria right now. Jalen Flores, who was I can't remember, 10th, 11th rounder maybe last year out of University of Texas. Kind of a rangy guy. He was drafted as a shortstop. He's playing third base. He's kind of interesting as well. Jesus Baez, who is listed as a third base / shortstop. Of course, Baez came over from the Mets in the Helsley trade last year. Baez had a reputation as being a guy who maybe didn't put his full attention into his work, and I didn't see any of that from him. I saw Baez was a smooth defender at shortstop and had times where he hit, but really didn't hit, with great consistency. So I thought third base was kind of an interesting position this spring because guys impressed me that maybe I wasn't expecting to. Cade McGee, from the beginning of camp to the end, the coaches kept talking about his hard hit percentage and the way when McGee made contact, the ball traveled a long way, and that's the kind of thing that catches your attention because it doesn't always show. And of course, spring training stats aren't even published, but I'm trying to score at least one game if not two at a time, and the hits didn't always come down, but the balls were hit hard.
So as someone who's seen a lot more, I'm going to talk about an ex-prospect, Nathan Church, somebody who's seen a lot more of him than I have. Has he always been a guy who swings at like just about everything, or is he kind of just I don't know what the word is, but
pressing or
struggling and really.
I think it's a latter, Gabe. I mean, his reputation coming up was kind of like Lars Nootbaar when he was in the minor leagues. You know, he's a tweener guy. He's not super big physically. Doesn't do one thing exceptionally well, but he did a lot of little things well. And what happened with Nathan Church when he got to Double-A, and especially when he went Triple-A, he discovered power. He found a way to get power out of his bat that he never had before and became a much more rounded player. But, of course, the challenge is if you're trying to hit for power, then you're going to have the problems that you described. And it just compounds when Church knows, hey, if when Nootbaar's coming back, how soon is Nootbaar going to come back? If I don't play well, I'm going to be back in Memphis. And that's probably what's going to happen and probably should.
Brian, let's look way off into the distance, shall we? Let's just peer into the future. And Emmanuel Luna, the Dominican Aaron Judge, we can all dream, can't we? Right?
Yeah,
just turned 17 years old in January. Probably should be sitting in my econ class. That's where he's at. What kind of?
I'm not sure about his English language skills yet, but maybe if he had a translator.
You're just down in my Spanish skills, is what you're doing there. You have no idea.
Hola!
Yeah. What's reasonable on a timeline? Like, how soon will we? I'm assuming he'll be in the complex leagues. Like, if he posts well there, will they push him? Like, what's the status? What's the track for a guy like that?
Well, Luna wasn't invited to spring training camp, and he wasn't invited to extended spring training camp. And I think they're going to. There hasn't been a case, I think, maybe since Alex Reyes, that they had an international signee that didn't play at least 1 year in the DSL.
Sure.
So, assume 2026 he's in the DSL and maybe he tears it up and comes to the U.S. next year. And if he comes to the U.S. next year, then he could be on a Ryan Franklin or a kind of timetable where maybe he opens with Palm Beach and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we're talking about a guy who hasn't had a professional at bat yet. So
it's just kind of interesting the way that, especially Major League Baseball, is so different than the other professional sports. Like, when you draft a guy or he comes into an organization in baseball or football, you see him pretty quick. Baseball, I mean, this could be 5, 6, 7 years before we see this guy. It's just interesting that they have all these balls in the air and timelines coming towards St. Louis. It's just such a different sport than the others.
Yeah, and, in the defense of Luna and the Cardinals, they gave him $2.3 million. $2.3 million. The last time the Cardinals spent that kind of money on an international player was back in the Randy Arozarena, Adolis Garcia year. And that was when there was a window of time where you could exceed your international spending budget without getting slapped seriously. Well, you could exceed it. Today you can't exceed it no matter what. And so in that realm, the Cardinals had a window and they spent money where they wouldn't normally have spent it. So for them to drop $2.3 million of their $8 million-ish budget on one player says that they have a high level of confidence that Luna's going to, move quickly.
What have you seen so far in AAA from Nelson Velasquez? Because obviously coming out of camp into the regular season, Velasquez, the thing on him was that he was showing really well, and the fan base, especially more of the general casual fans, were really hyped on him, excited for him, and thought that he deserved the opportunity to crack the opening day roster. Since going down to AAA, it's been a lot more of the same of kind of what he's always been. High strikeouts, not a lot of walks, occasional power, but not a whole lot. Have you been seeing anything in him that, might lead to a potential, reclaiming of what he was in spring training? Or do you think that kind of where he's at right now is probably all that he's going to wind up being?
I think it's probably more of the latter than the former. I don't think he's necessarily going to bat 129 all season long. I didn't look to see what his BABIP is to see how unlucky. Maybe one of you guys have that in front of you, but he's striking out, like you said, a third of the time, and that isn't what you expected to see from him. He's 27 years old, so he's pushing his peak years. I think one of the key reasons the Cardinals didn't add him to the roster was that he's in the same situation that Jose Fermin is in, and that is no minor league options remaining. So if they would have promoted Velasquez to the roster starting the season, they couldn't send him down when Nootbaar comes back, for example. And they don't have that problem with Nathan Church. He has minor league options. And so I think they wanted to see more from Velasquez, but they also didn't want to be put in a situation where they had to let him go for nothing. So I don't know that he's going to get back in the discussion again. I think the hope is, of course, that Baez is going to play so well in Memphis that he's going to render Velasquez, insignificant. Baez isn't ready now, and I think they did a very smart thing. If you remember, I think Baez hit home runs in 2 or 3 games in a row for St. Louis, and then they sent him down right away in spring camp. And that was not accidental. That was okay, we're not going to let anybody get overhyped about Joshua Baez before he's ready. The guy hasn't played a game in AAA, and we remember the last time a top outfield prospect, we all got enamored with spring training results, and what happened with Jordan Walker, obviously. So just like in one case, Velasquez's numbers were great in spring camp, but he's not that good. And Joshua Baez he's not ready for major league pitching, because let's face it, a lot of the pitchers that they see in spring training games aren't major leaguers, and they aren't major leaguers at peak efficiency throwing their best pitches in the toughest situations. So if I had to hazard a guess today, I would hazard a guess Velasquez may never make it to St. Louis. He'll spend the year at AAA and become a free agent and leave. And because again, the hope is that Joshua Baez, steps up, and he already has a 40-man roster spot. And if an outfield injury happens, obviously maybe even center, who knows? I was going to say not center field, but maybe even center. That they bring him up and give him a chance sometime in the second half.
I want to ask about what I consider a confusing pitching prospect who's currently in Memphis, Hansel Rincon, who was in high A and kind of mediocre, and he had to repeat, and then he got to Springfield, and all of a sudden he's striking out a bunch of guys, and then he got hurt, and his season ended. And now they promote him to Memphis. Is this a guy we should be paying attention to? Was his change for real, where all of a sudden he's a legitimate pitching prospect?
Well, we ranked him 23rd in the system, and we were admittedly aggressive on Hansel Rincon, but the guy can pitch. I mean, there's no doubt the guy can pitch, and he hasn't started this year until was it yesterday? When is today? I guess he got banged around a little bit, but he worked in long relief in his first start in Springfield. He worked long relief in his first start in Memphis. He's probably a tweener guy. He had already reached, even though he's only 23 years old, he had already reached minor league free agency because he was signed as a 16-year-old or 17-year-old, and he agreed to stay on with the Cardinals another year when he could have been a free agent and gone somewhere else. So if Rincon, doesn't pitch well enough to make the 40-man this year, he probably won't be back, and that's a good possibility given the other pitchers ahead of him in the pecking order. So I think he's a back of the rotation guy at AAA, or maybe a swing man.
Okay. Brian, congratulations. I'm giving you $100,000,
wow,
which I'm sure is just chump change based on your Cardinals, minor league coverage. No big deal for you, right?
Yeah. The Cardinal Nation makes millions per year.
Sure. Well, hit me up. But anyway, $100,000, you have got to put all of it on one pitcher that is going to, from the minor leagues, that you think is going to be the ace of the St. Louis Cardinals rotation when he surfaces at the major league level, because I think everybody on the podcast right now will agree we do not have an ace in St. Louis, and I think the hope is our ace is somewhere in Memphis or Springfield or one of Peoria, one of those. So $100,000, who you letting it ride on?
Well, a year ago I would have said Quinn Matthews. I'm not so sure about that anymore. Shoulders are concerning, and we've seen his control be a question. For a while last year, we thought it was Roby, and then he got hurt, and we don't know what he's going to be when he comes back. I don't think Hansen's it. I think Jerpy will probably be a reliever. I haven't seen Clark pitch. I think it might be Brandon Clark, but we haven't seen him pitch, and we don't know about this aneurysm and how that's going to be. He's had a bad injury history. Doyle certainly is the guy that most people would pick, but his resume is very short. Sange is probably the guy with the best results. He'd probably be the guy if I had to pick one today, but we talked about Tanner Franklin early on. If Tanner Franklin can handle this transition from relieving to starting, I mean, he's also an impressive guy, and not only are he and Doyle friends, but there's going to be some competition there.
Sure, yeah.
And that's kind of cool if you think about it.
Well, the good news for Cardinals fans is the Cardinals don't have to do what I just forced you to do, and you named several names that are, could be down the line number one type starters. So that's really
nice.
great.
Yeah, it's nice that there are guys in the hopper. But
Yes.
again, I would have said that before Jerpy got hurt, and before Roby got hurt, and before Matthews got hurt. So you've got to have a lot of guys in the mill because, it's not only the pyramid of competition, but it's also the pyramid of good health.
Brian, as always, we do appreciate the graciousness of your time, and we appreciate the wealth of knowledge you always share and impart with us. Thank you so much for coming on and joining us, and again, we just really appreciate you, taking the time to come and speak with us and talk to the great VEB listeners tonight.
Yeah, and make sure you catch our podcast on Wednesdays, too. You mentioned it before, Wednesday with Walton and Reese, the Cardinal Nation, and it's available on all the podcast apps as well. And, we drill down on the minor leagues every week, and my partner Kyle Reese is a tremendous resource. I know you've had him on multiple times, Jake, and nobody's better in terms of their detailed knowledge at the scouting level of minor league prospects.
Absolutely. Once again, that is Brian Walton of thecardinalnation.com. You can read all of his fabulous written work there. You can also hear him, like he mentioned, on all of your favorite streaming platforms with Wednesdays with Walton and Reese. For Raiders, Gabe Simons, Matt Smith, and Scott Plaza is playing hooky on us tonight, so I guess I can't accredit him. My name is Jake Wood, and we will talk to you all next week when we are joined by Eno Saris of The Athletic. Have a great week, St. Louis, and go Cards!